This is BBC World News. I'm Samantha Simmons. Our top stories. The US warns Syria of more missile strikes if chemical weapons are used again. We report from one of the sites that was targeted in the airstrikes.
This is what you were producing here?
Yes, antivino.
Isn't it possible that there were things going on here that you didn't know about?
No.
Myanmar repatriates the first family of Rohingya refugees from Bangladesh despite a UN warning that it is not safe to return. Firefighters in Australia tackle a huge bushfire near Sydney, which has forced hundreds of people to leave their homes.
And I'm Chris Mitchell, live on the Gold Coast, where the sun has set on Australia's Commonwealth Games.
Hello and welcome to BBC World News. America has warned the Syrian government that it stands ready to take more military action if there are any further chemical weapons attacks on Syrian civilians. The US, France and Britain want the UN to investigate a suspected poison gas attack on rebel-held territory near Damascus, although Russia is likely to block any such move. Chris Buckler reports.
The British, French and American forces were deployed to send a message to President Assad, and there was no way it went unnoticed in Damascus. The 1 hour of strikes and explosions were, despite the sights and sounds, limited in their scope and very deliberate in their targeting of facilities connected to chemical weapons.
The United States and our allies will not tolerate the use of chemical weapons against innocent men, women and children. And we are prepared to deter any further use of chemical weapons by the Assad regime.
This was one of the sites where the missiles landed. The Syrian government says this building in Damascus was home to science labs and training facilities. The Western Allies claim it was a place where technology for chemical and biological warfare was being developed.
I firmly believe that if they correctly calculated it, they wouldn't have done it, because first, it's a complete failure. Second, it will only lead to strengthen our resolve and persistence of the Syrian people to continue fighting terrorism until it's completely eradicated and the last terrorist is eliminated.
After the alleged attack in Douma, there are still concerns about chemical weapons, and that means there is still the threat of further action.
The United States is locked and loaded.
Straight talking has replaced diplomatic language at the UN Security Council. Here there are proposals for a new resolution that would call for a full investigation into the alleged attacks. But judging by recent clashes, that's likely to be vetoed by Syria's ally Russia.
This is how you want international affairs to be conducted now? This is hooliganism in international relations and not minor hooliganism, given that we're talking about major nuclear powers.
Theresa May has now published her government's legal case for approving the airstrikes, but she knows she will face questions at Westminster this week about why Parliament wasn't given a say.
Trump says more war, we say no more.
After the briefest of bombing campaigns, some are asking what has been achieved by these airstrikes and whether the West really has a strategy for Syria. Chris Buckler, BBC News, Washington.
Well, the airstrikes have been condemned by Syria as a breach of international law. However, the UK, France and the US all insist they were a legal act. Britain's Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson had this to say about the military action on the BBC's Andrew Marr programme.
Finally, the world has said enough is enough. And I think it's important to understand the limits of what we're trying to do. This is not about
to end the war.
That's right, Andrew. And I think that this is not going to, we must be honest, this is not going to turn the tide of the conflict in Syria. One can hope that it encourages the Russians to get Assad to the negotiating table in Geneva, to get a political process properly going. But that is, as it were, an extra. The primary purpose is to say no to the use of barbaric chemical weapons.
Well, the Syrian government denies having used chemical weapons and has insisted it is not breaking any international laws which prohibit their use. So just what were the US, French and British missions targeting? Seth Doane from CBS News went to see one of the damaged sites in Damascus and sent this report.
One of the targets of those airstrikes was still smoldering late this afternoon. The U.S. military says the Barze complex in Damascus was a center for the research, development, production and testing of chemical and biological weapons.
Your office was there?
Yes, where you see the smoke, the scientist Syed told us. He's been here for 38 years and said he cried when he saw this place today. His life's work destroyed.
Were chemical weapons being developed here?
That's totally incorrect, he said. The Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons visited here and did not report anything wrong with this place.
Syrians are adamant this was not a place to develop chemical weapons, but rather a place of learning, a research institution where they develop things like pharmaceuticals. What's clear now is that it's gone. This is what you were producing here?
Yes, antivenom.
Syed told us these airstrikes took his livelihood.
This is a big institution. Isn't it possible that there were things going on here that you didn't know about?
No, never, he told us.
Last year's report from the OPCW about the Barze facility noted that the Syrians delayed a scheduled visit due to security concerns, but ultimately chemical weapons investigators did not find any red flags. But Harold, the Pentagon says destroying that facility will set Syria's chemical weapons program back several years.
Seth Doane now. Let's get the latest now from Beirut. Our correspondent Lena Sinjab is standing by for us. Welcome to you, Lena. The US have warned Syria that they remain locked and loaded should Syria engage in any more chemical attacks. Have we had any response from the Syrian regime at the moment?
Well, the Syrian government has denounced this attack and called it an aggression against Syria, and basically accused the coalition, or especially the United States, that they don't recognize Syria's war against terrorism, and they say that every time we as the government succeed in fighting terrorism, they come up with an allegation to stop us from our war against terrorism. That's mainly what the Syrian government is saying. But having said that, Samantha, what's happened in these attacks on the 3 locations identified by the US is not going to stop the Syrian government. Perhaps this is going to give them another green light, like it did in 2013, when there was no efforts to stop Assad from atrocities that conducted against Syrians. Now the attack is only directed to stop the use of chemical weapons, but not conventional ones. Over 500,000 Syrians killed in this war by conventional, most of them by conventional weapons, but not by chemical ones.
You know, we heard from Seth Doane there, one of the sites that was targeted by these missiles. Are we getting more details about the other locations?
Well, the United States announced that there were 2 other locations near Homs, and basically said that one of them is a storage of also chemical weapons there. However, the Russians have issued a list of at least 8 locations, claiming that attacks also targeted some military bases. But this is we only hear it from the Russians, not from the coalition, who specified their targets and announced them.
Okay, Lena Sinjab in Beirut, thanks very much for the update. We can get all the background to the airstrikes in Syria on our website. Just log on to bbc.com/news, where you'll also find all of our analysis, including a piece by PJ Crowley, from former US Assistant Secretary of State, on what next after this Syrian airstrike and whether Donald Trump can just walk away.